So, for this week, I hope you will put your hands together and join me in welcoming Eva give a talk about moderation as a virtue.
Good morning, everybody. Sorry I ran so late. I was having some tech issues, but I'm ready to go. So this talk, although I called it Moderation is a Virtue, it's not about moderation as in temperance. It's about moderating groups, which is something that a lot of people are uncomfortable with the concept of. And they're like, well, why can't we just, let people be? I mean, we're all friends here. Why do I have to control people's behavior? This can be a tough sell for people who value things like free exchange of ideas, diversity, tolerance, things like that. And so this talk is about why it is really, really important to moderate your groups, whether that's an online group, an in-person group, a business, any kind of a group that you have some influence in or management of or leadership of. Moderating behavior and membership is actually critical. And as an illustration of this, I'd like to share some wisdom from They Might Be Giants. I'm not able to share audio and video from my computer, so I've asked Stephen to do that for us. This is They Might Be Giants, Your Racist Friend. Feel free to sing along with it if you know the words.
This is where the party ends. I just sit here wondering how you stand by your racist friend. I know politics for you, but I feel like a hypocrite talking to you and your racist friend. It was the loveliest party that I've ever attended. If anything was broken, I'm sure it could be mended. My head is tight from this bobbing and pretending. Listen to some bullet head, the madness that he's saying. This is where the party.
All right, thanks, Stephen. So yeah, a little musical interlude there, but I want to talk about that song a little bit, about how it illustrates problems with just letting people be in your space. So we've got the narrator here. He went to a great party that a friend of his threw, but then another friend of this host made some racist remarks, and the narrator called him on it. And the host, instead of going, oh yeah, that's really not cool, and maybe you should leave the party or apologize or something, he's standing by his friend and not calling him on the racism, saying, let's not talk politics. So talking about the racism is politics. So as a result, the person who was enjoying the party is now leaving the party. And this illustrates that if you let racists or other jerks continue to be jerks in your space, then they are going to take over. And people who don't like that kind of talk or behavior, either because they're being targeted by it or because they simply don't want to stand around looking like they support it, they're going to leave. And you're going to be left with a party for jerks. So I have more on this same principle from a couple of very different sources, the philosopher Karl Popper and the punk band The Dead Kennedys. I'm not going to play The Dead Kennedys, but I'm going to share some of their thoughts and actions. So Karl Popper's paradox, am I able to share screen? Have I been set up for that? I'm going to need to share screen for some stuff.
I'm setting up for that right now.
So Karl Popper's paradox of tolerance is that if you tolerate intolerance, you will end up with nothing left but intolerance. So there are limits to tolerance in that as soon as it runs up against somebody who's going, no, we're not going to tolerate anything, you have to stop there. You have to shut down or kick out intolerant people in order to allow space for anybody else. So tolerance is not something we should think of as a core virtue. It is a social contract, and we don't owe it to people who break the social contract and are attempting to do harm to others, whether violence or verbal hostility or whatever. But here's the cartoon. We've got the paradox of tolerance. Should a tolerant society tolerate intolerance? You want more tolerance? Respect my ideas. The answer is no. It's a paradox, but unlimited tolerance can lead to the extinction of tolerance. When we extend tolerance to those who are openly intolerant, let's give them a chance. The tolerant ones end up being destroyed, and tolerance with them. Any movement that preaches intolerance and persecution must be outside of the law. As paradoxical as it may seem, defending tolerance requires to not tolerate the intolerant. So that's the principle we're working from here. And this is illustrated really well by the history of the punk movement in the United States in the 70s and 80s. I talked about this in another talk several years ago about the anti-fascist movement, because it also represents that well. Punk was all about rebellion and protest and pain and despair. And some bands and fans used Nazi symbols such as swastikas for shock value, especially early on in the movement. Now, this invited neo-Nazis to feel at home in the clubs and to blend right in. Nazi punks would show up at clubs and start fights. They would beat people up who were black. They would beat people up who just looked like easy targets, anyone they thought of as inferior. And they turned the environment of a mosh pit from friendly crashing into each other to stomping heads and really trying to hurt people. In the United States, not in punk movements everywhere, but in the US punk scene, a couple of important things happened that made the punk scene largely unwelcoming to Nazis and kept the rest of the scene intact. One of those things was that many clubs made public statements and rules barring guests and bands from showing up using Nazi or neo-Nazi insignia. So if you came in with a swastika, a racist t-shirt, or red shoelaces on your black combat boots showing you were a neo-Nazi, rather than one of the anti-racist skinheads who looked almost like them, you wouldn't get in. And bouncers were authorized to kick out anybody, not only people who committed violence or hate speech, but people who showed up wearing gear that declared their intent to do so. So if you showed up saying I'm a Nazi, you were not going to get in, or you were going to get kicked out as soon as you showed yourself. The other piece is what the bands did and how that influenced the audiences. Most punk bands stopped using Nazi imagery when they realized some of their fans were actually Nazis and weren't just like, oh yeah, that's so cool and like outrageous. There was a moment when somebody handed out Nazi armbands just before a multi-band show where the Clash and some other bands were going to share equipment. And the Clash went, whoa, no, you are not going to share our equipment if you're wearing a Nazi armband. Susie, take off that band. And so they did. So there were some stands taken where bands would challenge each other. They would challenge the audience. They would mock Nazis from the stage. And one particularly good example was the Dead Kennedys actually wrote and released a song called Nazi Punks Fuck Off. It's only a 1-minute song. I'm gonna share the lyrics here. I'm not gonna play this one. It's actually pretty hard to understand the lyrics from the hearing of it, but the general message is very clear. You should go listen to it at some point. Let me get this scrolled so it's readable. Okay, so here's the song. And basically, they're not just saying you're not welcome here and we don't agree with you. They're saying also you're stupid and you're weak and you're not a punk. So they were challenging the punkness of the Nazis who called themselves punks and saying, you are absolutely not what we're here for. Get out of here. It's actually a really well put together piece of messaging. And obviously they're performing it from the stage for an audience that includes Nazis is going to be like embarrassing for the Nazis. Like, whoa, I thought my favorite bands were down with this stuff and now I'm going to go slink out. Or if I'm still looking like a Nazi, somebody's going to punch me. Because the band's messaging like this emboldened the audiences to fight back or even fight preemptively. Rather than waiting for Nazis to throw a punch, they would punch someone as soon as they realized they're standing next to a Nazi. Now, violence isn't always the appropriate solution. The punk scene was a little atypical in that its bullies were really obvious and violent. So this was actually very successful, and the punk scene in the U.S. mostly got rid of its Nazis. You know, if you wanted to be a Nazi club, a Nazi punk band, you'd have to go find a club that would actually play you, and those were pretty far between. What does all this have to do with moderating a Facebook group or having a leadership role in a science fiction convention or a knitting club or a support group or a workplace? Well, it has a lot to do with it. Like I said, the punk scene had unusually straightforward bullies. In most groups, bullies are a lot more subtle. They may commit their violence through hostile language, demeaning actions, unwanted touches, whatever they can get away with to make others feel small. And that bullying behavior, even when it's on a less obvious scale than coming in to kick heads, needs to be managed by moderators who enforce behavior standards and kick out people who violate them, or what happens is the Nazis take over your club. There's a book called The No Asshole Rule, and I'm going to share the cover here, which also relates really well to this. This is by Robert I. Sutton, PhD, and he's writing from the perspective of workplaces. And you want to make sure that you don't have a jerk or an asshole or a bully, whatever you want to call them, in your workplace, even if they're really talented. Because even if this person is apparently your best employee, if they're making everyone else feel terrible, making the environment toxic, they're actually driving down everyone else's productivity. And they're keeping good people from staying and keeping good people from wanting to work there. So studies have been done where people realized, hey, you know, we thought this guy was our best employee, and so we needed him even though he was a jerk. But as soon as we actually fired him, productivity went up because everyone else was doing better and more people were happy with working there. The other thing that happens if there's a jerk around, especially if they're a manager, everyone else is not going to want to bring up problems or make suggestions because they're afraid of getting yelled at. So in a workplace, this creates a toxic environment. And it's true for other kinds of groups as well. If there's a jerk in the environment, it makes it harder for other people to do their jobs or to participate or to simply have a nice time. So a lot of people will either leave or they'll contribute less. Besides workplaces and the punk scene, another really clear illustration recently was Facebook and Twitter unwittingly demonstrated this principle by not banning hate speech and false information on their platforms years ago. Again, if you don't kick out the Nazis, you end up with a party just for Nazis. So people who belittle, yell at, attack, or violate the consent of those around them need to be banned. Need to be banned from social groups, workspaces, and online communities. And that's not a violation of free speech. It's actually an expression of the rights of the manager of the space to and of their responsibility to protect the safety and the freedoms and the rights of other people in that space. It's necessary in order to preserve the space for people who are there in good faith, because bullies make it no fun and sap everybody's spirit. It's especially important not to tolerate what we call missing stares. Give me a sec here. There's an article here on missing stares that you can look up from Pervocracy. But I'll just share their picture on the top here. So what a missing stare is when we're talking about a person is it's a group member that all the regulars know is a problem, but they've kind of gotten used to watching out for them and working around them and warning newcomers about them. This person may be known to take advantage of people, maybe grope drunk women, or maybe is actually a straight up rapist, but they're still invited to parties or allowed in the club. And if they find a newcomer who hasn't been thoroughly warned about them, they're going to take advantage of that and hurt people. But they're still allowed to stay because people are friends with them, or maybe they don't really take the problem seriously. Missing stares are a really serious problem in a lot of in-person communities. They ride on other people's social trust because they're assumed to be friends and assumed to be safe, and they make the environment unsafe. So don't just warn people, fix the problem if you got a missing stare in your community. Okay, but not everybody needs kicking out. Maybe I'm not a Nazi or a predator or even a run of the mill asshole. Maybe I just acted like a jerk that one time because I had had a terrible day, or I didn't understand the social norms, or I had no idea that word had a racist history. So being a moderator isn't always about getting out the ban hammer. It's also about responding to individual small scale incidents promptly and proportionally. You want to set and enforce behavior standards that make your space welcoming and that discourage jerk behavior. The exact rules will vary with your group. An online group might also have a rule that you can't advertise, or a discussion panel might need rules about staying on topic. But these are some general principles that apply to just about any group endeavor. Clearly state the behavior expectations. This might be with a few questions at the beginning for an online group. It might be a poster on the wall at a bar. It might be something people sign when they join a club. Make those rules clearly stated. Model those expectations and enforce them consistently. If you have a slogan that says you don't tolerate bullying, and then you walk around making misogynistic jokes, or you let some mean remarks slide because it was a manager or this really cool guy who made them, that's actually worse than not having the rule, because then not only do you not actually have that rule, but you make people cynical. They know they can get away with breaking them because obviously you're not enforcing it. It's very visible. So have the rules, be consistent about modeling and enforcing them. Address issues promptly. For minor first offenses, tell the person specifically what they did that was a problem and what they need to change. If they're genuinely just ignorant or socially awkward, they'll probably be really embarrassed and apologetic. If they respond with hostility or insults, that's a good clue it wasn't an accident and is likely to happen again. Don't spend time arguing with someone about their behavior. If you know what they did and it violated community standards, that's all that needs to be covered in the conversation. You don't have to stay and argue about their excuses. However, make sure you know what really happened. You want to get the story straight, get first person accounts, talk to multiple people, read the logs, whatever you need to do to get the whole picture. Because sometimes abusers will lie to make themselves look like victims, and sometimes people are simply mistaken about what happened or someone's motivations for what happened. Also, make sure you have clear communication between moderators so everyone knows what's already been said or done and can connect up patterns of incidents. People shouldn't get infinite second chances just because different people dealt with them, because nobody knows that they're actually a repeat offender. Make sure you're coordinating. If you need to come up with new rules, go ahead. But if you keep on having to make up a new rule because somebody did something slightly different this time, the rule is probably not the problem. You probably need more general rules and you need to get that person out. Online, you can do private messages to let someone know that wasn't acceptable. You can close threads. You can delete a thread if you need to remove something that shouldn't stay online. Or you can just post, hey, this has been closed because that was unacceptable. Public problem behaviors generally need to be called out on the spot so as not to leave anyone attending the group with the impression that that's accepted. You want to make it clear, hey, that's not okay, that needs to stop, that doesn't represent this group's values. Or else two things happen. One, potential targets go, oh, this isn't a safe space for me. And other people who agree with the bully are going to go, oh, it's okay to say that kind of stuff here. You're going to get more of it. So don't leave hostile actions unchecked in the name of avoiding conflict. You're only going to get more hostility. So that's a whole bunch of stuff you can do if you are in a moderator type position. But sometimes in life, we are not in a moderator position. We're a victim or a witness to bullying. We might not be able to kick the person out or fire them because we're not the restaurant owner or their boss. We're a coworker or an employee or a student or a customer. We can still act to discourage Nazis and other kinds of bullies by speaking out against their actions and statements, if that's a safe thing to do in the circumstance, or by undermining their posture of authority, like the bands did when they made fun of the Nazis, and by supporting people around us who are being victimized or trying to maintain in the face of, a bully boss or something. The core idea here is that we want to maintain our values in the face of bullies who want to pull them apart and victimize people. Nazis and other kinds of bullies and jerks want to drag everyone into a worldview where everyone is in competition, there are limited resources, and they are on top. They get to win the zero-sum game, which, I don't think a zero-sum game is that worth. I don't think a negative sum game is worth winning, and that's what they're trying to make it. So if you're playing Prisoner's Dilemma with a bully, they're going to defect in a heartbeat, even though it's better overall and for everybody if everybody cooperates. It leads to objectively better outcomes. If you refuse to buy into that and you insist on cooperation, mutual support, and mutual respect in your community, including the step of kicking out people who harm others when necessary, that's an essential part of protecting your space and your people from bullies. Insist that people in spaces you have influence over treat people decently. In a world the bullies want to insist is zero-sum or negative sum, with them in charge of it, kindness, cooperation, and good boundaries are as punk as it gets. Thank you.
Thank you, Eva. Can everyone give a round of applause?